A biblical perspective on life, culture and current events. This is 2020 on Vision.
It's a crucial election season that we are into, where the national values of Australia will be decided by voters, just like you and I. The values of the major parties are maybe not as much as they need to be, but they ought to be under the microscope, perhaps more than ever. Well, some commentators are saying the coming federal election is so serious, Christian schools could be sunk if there is a power-sharing arrangement between Labor and the Greens. But it's not just the left side of politics that are propelled by those woke winds of policy influence. On the Conservative side, the Liberal coalition is described as weak on issues like gender clinics. Now, some change happening in the atmosphere. The US example with Donald Trump. Now the German election with a tangible move towards a more conservative base. And we might be intensely interested in where our major parties sit on crucial issues we sometimes connect to the culture wars. And as Christians, we're perhaps more likely than ever to want to know about the contrast between what our major parties have on offer and how that sits with the timeless wisdom of biblical values. Well, our special guest today, Lyle Shelton, leads the Family First Party in Australia. He's been a champion for common sense and Christian values as they conflict with the prevailing woke agenda of mainstream politics. He's no stranger to the fiery furnace of controversy, with ongoing court action around drag queen story time in public libraries. And Family First is standing more than 100 candidates nationally, 50 of those in the state of Queensland, then 5 candidates for Senate seats in the coming federal election. Well, it's always a pleasure to catch up and to get the insights of Lyle Shelton. Lyle, a special welcome back to 2020.
Neil, thank you so much. Always a pleasure to be with you.
Lyle, we're getting to the time when we'll be into what we might even call an election fever. Well, we're not too far out from a Western Australian election, just over a week away. And the coming federal election, it's coming up as soon as Albo calls the shots and sets a date. But some are saying this may even be for Australia a civilisational moment. How serious do you think things are with this coming federal election?
Neil, I think it's incredibly serious, and I do think it's a civilisational moment. We are at a point in our history where this woke agenda that means that, there's no such thing as boys or girls, that we have to give up reliable and affordable electricity to some sort of a climate cult. Those two totemic things, I guess, are eating away at our civilisation, and here in Australia, we've seen some tectonic plates shift in the US with the election of President Trump, and he's pushing back on that. And of course, in the German elections at the weekend, I guess the question is, will Australia start to move away from woke and to a position where we start to restore our civilization, which really is socially and economically heading in a very bad direction?
What's your feeling here, Lyle? And maybe, your Family First Party is doing all sorts of research and things like that with those changes. And I mentioned those in the introduction. You've just affirmed those. The move towards Trump in the US, the German election's gone conservative. What's your feeling? And is there any research that you've had any access to? Is there a change that's happening in Australia?
Yeah, we're a small party. We don't have a lot of access to polling or professional research, but we have been standing in elections in the last couple of years, and most recently 2 weeks ago in the Werribee by-election in Victoria, Labor heartland, working class, working families, and Family First picked up 4.3% of the vote there. Our team did a tremendous job, but to us, and that might not seem a lot to your listeners, but for a minor party like ours, that's actually a very credible result. It shows that there's a shift towards the sort of values that we are offering. And also there's a massive shift away from the major parties, both the Liberal and the Labor Party, in that litmus test election in Werribee and out of Western Melbourne. They achieved a primary vote of less than 30%. Now that is that would be very distressing for the party operatives. So I think there's an appetite in Australia for a family-focused message, a family-friendly, family-positive message that's not woke, that wants family budgets to be restored by getting rid of net zero and all the economic pain that comes from rolling out windmills and solar panels and dispersed transmission lines, and then, of course, getting the gender-fluid ideology out of their schools and allowing parents the freedom to educate their children in their faith-based schools. So they're the sort of things that we're pitching to Australians. I think there's an appetite out there, and certainly as we've dipped our toe in the electoral waters, that's proven there's an appetite for that.
An appetite for not being woke. Now, this is a very, very intensely interesting thing, and I'll just pause and explore this with you for a few moments, because I know you're not afraid to put the boot in both sides. I don't think there's any doubt in any listener's mind that the ALP is really solidly woke. And there's no doubt probably in the mind of majority of listeners that the Liberal National Coalition has been very woke. But it does appear that Peter Dutton hasn't embraced some of those things that have just caused such ructions and upheaval in the US. Donald Trump has decided to turn the tables and really very, very strongly change the woke narrative there. I wonder whether you've got a thought about Peter Dutton. Do you think that he is going to remain on the woke side of the culture war debates on so many issues, because he's basically on the same side as Anthony Albanese? That might be why there's minor parties getting bigger vote. What are your thoughts here?
Yeah, look, that's exactly right, Neil. And when I put the boot in, to use your term, it's a metaphorical boot, and it's in the context of the contest of ideas, never personal. But I'm deeply concerned with, I guess, the stance Peter Dutton has been taking. I think his instincts are certainly conservative. This is just my opinion. Listeners can take it for how they want. But you've got to look at what he's been saying, not just since Trump came in, but over history. There's a timidity in the Liberal Party because of the teal seats that flipped at the last election, and because of also the civil war that's going on in the Liberal Party. There's a big amount of woke water in the Liberal Party ship. And that's why you have people like Senator Dave Sharma saying, under no circumstances will the Liberal Party change the Sex Discrimination Act to restore the definition of woman to what it should be, so that girls and women can be protected from biological males. And that's why you have Peter Dutton saying that he's not going to shut down the gender clinics. Instead, he's allowing his members to have a conscience vote on whether there should be an inquiry into the activities of these child gender clinics that are damaging thousands of Australian kids with puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones, making kids sterile, sexually unable to function, and of course in many cases of young girls having their breasts cut off so that they can appear as boys. So for Peter Dutton to say that issue of just even having a look at it is a conscience vote for his people, as he said 2 weeks ago, that to me shows he has no conviction and no understanding of just how serious these culture wars are and why decisive action is needed. So he's on the side of Labor, the Teals and the Greens when it comes to, that really iconic issue about the protection of our children. So I've been shocked to see his timidity, and it goes to their concern about the Teal seats and, of course, the left-wing element in the Liberal Party, which really is a controlling element of that Liberal Party, despite a couple of notable outliers who the party ignore. And I'm speaking of people like Matt Canavan and Senator Alex Antic, but those guys are always outspoken, but the Liberal Party doesn't listen to them.
Okay. Peter Dutton, I'm picking up from what you're saying here, that you've identified timidity and real weakness as a leader when it comes to these very, very important issues that affect every individual and family in this nation.
Absolutely, they do. It's really important. This gender issue is so important because it goes, if we can't be clear about boys and girls and what gender clinics are allowed to do in terms of trying to transition children medically with these experiments, that also affects freedom of speech. It affects freedom of religion, because you're giving ground to the activists who have a political philosophy behind this. And if you can't be clear about it, it means that none of us are safe to speak the truth about gender. It means that girls and women's sport are going to be conflicted, and it means children are going to be damaged. And it flummoxes me that the Liberal Party and their national coalition can't be stronger on that issue. And just be clear, I mean, the Keir Starmer Labor government in the UK has shut down the gender clinics, and that's been upheld under a very radically left Labor administration. If a Conservative alternative Prime Minister in Australia can't see the moral clarity of this, then there's something deeply rotten in the Liberal Party.
Let me just get a little personal update from you, Lyle Shelton. So many of our listeners so familiar with your history, right back to those days, leading the Australian Christian lobby, even going through the circumstances of a bomb attack on your headquarters in Canberra. Some people might have forgotten about these things, but because you've had a strong stance, and as Christians we'll say there's been a biblical foundation to that stance, but you've been a victim in the justice system where this idea of lawfare has been so powerful to shut down your voice. These ongoing battles that you've been having over drag queen story time, this is not all over yet, but this has been going on year after year after year. What's the latest for you?
Yeah, look, it's been a 5-year legal ordeal, Neil. I think it's coming close to an end, but I'll be back in court in Brisbane on the 17th, 18th and 19th of March for a 3-day appeal hearing. So these LGBTIQA plus drag queens are determined to shut down any criticism of their agenda, to introduce gender fluid ideology and LGBTIQA plus sexual expressionism to 3 to 8-year-olds. That's what they're trying to do in our council libraries. And because I've criticised that and said that they are dangerous role models for children, which they are, because gender fluid ideology hurts children, sexual expressionism should have no place anywhere near children. But because I've criticised that, they've dragged me through the courts for 5 years in a case that's cost, we've raised, through the generosity of people who've crowdfunded our case, over $250,000, my wife and I. I know the Human Rights Law Alliance has kicked in probably a similar amount. It's been a very expensive, time-consuming case for the right for freedom of speech to say what we believe about what needs to be said to protect children. And, Neil, this is why I'm very cross about all of our politicians, but particularly Conservative politicians, because they know about cases like mine and many others. I'm not the only one going through this, but they do nothing to uphold freedom of speech in this country. And, we say we venerate the Anzacs who fought for our freedoms, but we don't have any politicians who will fight for our freedoms in the Parliament and get rid of stupid laws like this, which cause people like me and so many others to be dragged through the courts year after year simply for expressing a point of view.
I don't know if there's any assurances from any side to do away with those things that are setting up the sort of lawfare that can shut down free speech as it has done in your case. Just come back to...
There are none, Neil. I can tell you there are no side. There has been no commitments made by anyone in politics. In fact, it's gone the other way. And of course, obviously I'm against the anti-Semitism that's been going on. It's shocking. But there's been a reaction to that where we've actually made the so-called hate speech laws that federally and New South Wales and Victoria, new laws have been passed which actually create greater vulnerabilities for people like me. And the LGBTIQA plus political activists have smuggled in their agenda with the anti-Semitism agenda and have actually made freedom of speech even harder now. And again, our politicians just are not standing up for these basic freedoms.
Well, we're going to come back and continue our conversation in a few moments, and I just want to open this up. Listeners might have your own question or comment. You might want to hear some perspectives here on both sides of politics as we are approaching a federal election, one that may be a civilisational moment for Australia. The sorts of threats that could continue if there is a Labor-Greens power-sharing agreement beyond the election. And what even happens if Peter Dutton and the coalition wins power without any sort of commitments to rolling back any of these things in a woke agenda? So just throwing this open. And listeners, you might have your own question. You can join us on 1-800-316-316. Love you to join in our conversation, 1800 316 316, as we talk with Lyle Shelton, who leads the Family First Party in Australia, familyfirstparty.org.au. In fact, they're standing 100 candidates nationally. There might be one in your electorate. You might want to connect with that particular candidate and ask them any hard questions you might have too. 50 of those candidates will be standing in Queensland, and there'll be 5 candidates for Senate seats, and I think you're one of them, aren't you, Lyle, just quickly?
Yes, that's right, Neil. I'm standing for the Senate in New South Wales, where I'm living now. Just on those figures too, that's very much our aspiration. We've got commitments from people for that many seats. We're a small party, so our candidates are having to raise their $2,000 nomination fee for the Australian Electoral Commission, but provided that is able to be met, we should be able to run those sort of numbers of candidates around the eastern part of Australia.
Life, culture and current events from a biblical perspective. This is 2020 with Neil Johnson on Vision Christian Radio.
Wonderful to have you with us, and our talkback line open on 1800 316 316. Our special guest is Lyle Shelton. He leads the Family First Party in Australia, a champion of common sense over decade after decade. Been in the fiery furnace, the controversy around the court action about drag queen story time, that's still going after 5 years. There's a personal demonstration of how free speech is shut down by the use of courts, and nobody on either side of our government is doing anything to address any of that. When we talk about these sorts of things, Lyle, let me ask you here, and just to, I'm just presenting this scenario. It seems to be even the likely outcome of the coming federal election, the prospect of a hung parliament, and the formation of a Labor-Greens power-sharing arrangement. I'm wondering whether you've got any thoughts as to what that might look like in Australia.
Yes, Neil, I do. It would be chaos and extremely dangerous for Christian people and for anyone who loves freedom of speech and just the basic liberties that we've come to enjoy. It would also be disastrous for the economy. So the Greens and the Teals, who would be involved in a power-sharing arrangement with the Labor Party, which, as you said earlier, and I agree with that, they are completely woke. It would mean the end of Christian schools. They came very close to destroying Christian schools in this current term of government with legislation designed to strip Christian schools of the freedom to employ staff who believe what the parents believe and want their children taught about gender and marriage and such things. That legislation was stalled thanks to a terrific campaign by the Christian school movement, which caused Anthony Albanese to back down. But if he's in power with the Greens and the Teals next time in a minority government, his hand will be forced. There'll be no stalemate. They'll just ram it through. The other big concern is economics. Labor, Teals, and the Greens are all in this climate cult, Paris, which Peter Dutton is saying he's still going to stay in too, by the way. But that's going to continue to cause our electricity prices to skyrocket. Our lights to go out, and this is the Australian Energy Market Operator saying these things, not me. Any serious economist or engineer can see that the trajectory we're on with windmills and solar panels and dispersed transmission is just a disaster. And we need to be moving to a place of energy abundance to drive down the costs of electricity, the costs of fuel and gas, which then free our economy and reduce inflation and therefore reduce cost of living. But if Labor, the Greens and the Teals are sharing power, you'll see the cost of everything continue to go up, as well as the debt, inflation. It will be, if you think the last 3 years have been bad, it'll be turbocharged under that sort of an arrangement.
On the economic issues at hand, cost of living increases. This appears to be the way that polling suggests that all the voters of Australia are concerned most about. Those sorts of things, under either side, ALP or a coalition government after the next election. What are your predictions around the ability of our major parties to even contain what is a cost of living crisis?
Well, I've got no confidence in Labor and the Teals and the Greens because they don't understand fiscal discipline at all. And we've seen this with, their current spending. Our debt is approaching $1 trillion. The inflation crisis we have has nothing to do with the Ukraine war. That's all to do with government spending by the federal and state Labor governments, and it has to do with the energy crisis that they've created by trying to shut down reliable and cheap electricity. Under Peter Dutton and the coalition, I think it will be better because whilst they are saying they'll stay in Paris, which is a bad decision, and I think reality will catch up with that. I think Peter Dutton's just saying that so he doesn't pick a fight in the lead up to the election. But everyone knows that the net zero agenda is dead. I think that the coalition will be far more bullish about stepping on the gas, literally, like getting gas into the electricity system to bring power prices down, and probably a bit more coal, and then eventually moving towards nuclear, which is zero emissions and abundant. So I think we'll fare better economically under a coalition government. They're just not committing to anything because they want to stay small target. That's my analysis of the situation.
Mostly when we think of family first, we're thinking of these culture war issues, and those clearly are strengths, and there'll be people in the Christian community that recognise those strengths, but sometimes they might have some doubts or be a little bit cynical about a party like Family First having accurate insight into some of these economic challenges. So far as, when you're talking about climate, net zero, those sorts of things, what hope do you have that if you win a Senate seat, that there might be some influence along your type of policy agenda into the next Parliament?
Yeah, look, we would be hopeful we could have a lot of influence. A Senate seat in the Parliament is a very influential position. It's particularly influential if you do end up in a balance of power situation. Now, that would be the dream for Family First, whether it's at this election or sometime in the future in a state or federal Parliament. But you're right to observe that, yes, we are known for the social policy issues, and that's important because the other parties have abandoned the idea of marriage and family and the pro-life agenda. So you need a political voice to carry those important social policy issues which the major parties have neglected or abandoned. But we do have an economic message, Neil, and anyone who's been following us for the last 2.5, 3 years will see we have been banging on about net zero. We have been banging on about housing affordability. Because for families to flourish, they've got to be able to pay the bills, they've got to be able to put kids through school, they've got to be able to build some wealth, and their kids have got to be able to have the hope of getting a home so that they too can get married and found and form a family. All these things are under threat at the moment because of really bad economic policy driven by the Paris climate cult, driven by high government spending, and that's why we've got a very strong economic message as well, because it does dovetail with our social policy message. We want to see families flourish. We want to see marriage restored. We want to see the tax system reformed so it doesn't penalise married couples anymore, so it doesn't penalise parents who want to care for children in their home instead of outsourcing it to childcare. So we want those choices to be back in the system for economic and social good.
Let me ask you about the climate cult as you're framing that, because we all might be appreciative of the fact that there has been a real movement along the climate change issues, and framing it as climate cult means just being caught up in that as though it's some sort of alternate religion. But that alternate religion obviously has the disadvantages for families and those sorts of dimensions. When we talk climate cult, explain to us what you might be thinking about the way people are captivated by that, and governments certainly captivated by that, and the expense to the nation is huge.
The cost to the nation in the last 20 or 30 years as we've pursued this has been enormous. And this is why kids can't afford a house today. This is why people can't afford their electricity. This is why we're in a cost of living crisis, because someone has told us that unless we decarbonise our economies to try and heal the planet, then we're facing global boiling and some sort of catastrophe. There's no evidence of any of that. All of Al Gore's predictions about melting ice caps, rising sea levels, more frequent hurricanes and disasters, the more intense, none of that has come true. There is no evidence that any of that has occurred. And this was demonstrated again last week at the Alliance for Responsible Citizenship conference in London. I wasn't able to go this time, but I watched the live stream into the early hours of the morning. And clearly the very smart people at ARC, and of course their own, former Deputy Prime Minister John Anderson is one of the founders of ARC, they put a lot of experts on that stage, which proved exactly what I've just been saying, and the need to move now to energy abundance instead of energy scarcity, which is what the climate cult has been forcing Western countries to do. Meanwhile, China and India and Indonesia, all of these countries continue developing and lifting their people out of poverty. How are they doing it? Off the back of coal. And Australia's 1% of emissions makes no difference. And clearly there's been no difference to the climate as a result of what's been going on in the last 20 or 30 years. Now, look, I don't know whether carbon dioxide is going to cause adverse problems for us in the climate. I don't think anyone really knows. There's a hypothesis there, but that's been driving government policy. If that is the case, then we should all be shifting to nuclear.
Lyle, the Church and State Conference, that's coming up the 7th and the 8th of March. We're only just over a week away from that. You've also got a little bit of an alignment there. You'll be part of the Church and State Conference. You've been there every year. I've been there as well. And Family First Conference is going to be held just ahead of it. How does that all fit together?
Yeah, look, Dave Pello, the convener of the Church and State Conference, has been very gracious to Family First, and they've got the venue for a couple of days, and very kindly allowed us to use the venue at the airport conference centre in the morning. So Alex Todd, our Queensland campaign director, is organising a Queensland Family First conference. There'll be probably about 50 or so of us there at that. I'll be speaking about Wendy Francis, who will be known to many of your listeners, Daniel from Christian Schools Australia, and Bernard Gaynor as well. So we want to just have a bit of a focus on some of the key issues affecting families and Christian schools at that conference, and then we'll join in with Dave's conference as it kicks off on Friday afternoon next week.
1-800-316-316 if you'd like to join into our conversation around a politics issue, national values issues. Come back to parents here for a few moments, because you've been a champion, Lyle Shelton, for marriage and the family, for parenting, for religious freedom, for freedom of expression, just freedom of speech. Parents and their ability to educate kids in the way they want to have their kids educated, that's under threat, is it not?
It's very much under threat, Neil, and there is a hateful agenda against Christian schools in particular, but this potentially would capture Muslim schools, where Labor, the Greens, the Teals, and a significant number of the Liberal Party, I have to say, don't support the idea of Christian schools having the freedom to employ staff who will model to children a Christian worldview. And that comes down to things like, gender. So legislation that almost passed the Parliament in this term was focused on forcing a Christian school to employ someone who might be an advocate for LGBTIQA plus ideology. Now, I think any Christian school or a Muslim school or a Jewish school should be free to say, no, we select the people who are going to be the role models for our kids. It's not for the government to tell us that. But there's a very hateful, strong agenda, which is quite powerful in the Greens, the Teals, Labor, and elements of the Liberal Party that wants to strip Christian schools of that freedom. That would be the end of Christian schooling in this nation if that happened, and I think we need to be very vigilant about it, and that's why I'm so worried about a potential change of government. I think the Liberals would be better on that as a whole, but as I say, some of their members are also on board with this woke agenda that is anti-freedom of parents' rights.
If anyone had the right to say, I told you so, it would be you, Lyle Shelton, because so many listeners will remember the drum that you were beating in the lead up to the marriage referendum, the plebiscite, and that's going right back now to 2017, where you were warning that there would be a chaotic threat to families in Australia if the whole issue of marriage between a man and a woman was dismantled. Well, it has been dismantled, and we are seeing a lot of chaotic things. Do you think that some of these agendas are actually driving this threat now to parents and having their right to educate the kids the way they want?
Absolutely, Neil. It's the same people that drove the same-sex marriage campaign in the years leading up to that 2017 marriage plebiscite that are driving the agenda to dismantle children's gender and the idea that there's boys and girls. And Neil, can I just say, I appreciate your very kind words about the role I've played, but I just have to say that in anything I've done, whether it's with the Australian Christian Lobby or now with Family First, I've been blessed to have amazing teams of people that have supported me, that have prayed for me, that have backed me financially, that have volunteered. So, anything that happens is always the result of a big team of people and support behind you. So I'm incredibly grateful for that. But yes, there is an absolute agenda. There are real people that are driving these things, and I can name names: Rodney Croom from Tasmania, Anna Brown from Equality Australia. These are the people who were very upset when Donald Trump withdrew US government funding from the child gender clinics in America. They were complaining about that potential to happen here in Australia. These are the people who drove the marriage campaign, who said there'd be no consequences. They're the people now that are coming after your children because they want to ply them with puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones and cut off their breasts. So it's a dangerous agenda, and it has influence in politics in Labor, the Greens, the Teals, and a big cohort in the Liberal Party.
We're taking calls on 1800 316 316. Hi to Jenny, who's in Portland in Victoria. Jenny, welcome.
Hi. Yep.
What are your thoughts?
All right, I've walked in and just heard a little tiny bit of this conversation, but one thing I want to say is this whole thing that it's a children's right to have a new home while they're young, whatever, they have a right to it, and we're depriving it, and you're fanning the flame for this. My father in Western District and my uncle down in Melbourne at the same time got married, bought a block of land, built a garage on it, and we lived in that. So little bit by little bit, as they worked, they added a room on their house. We had an outside dunny, and the house was really small by today's standards. And I just thought the war veterans would turn over in their grave, listen to this rubbish, and the children won't be able to get their own home. Steve Cheddar, I didn't get my own home till I was 50.
Hey, Jenny, I think you're reflecting what a lot of people might be thinking around the difficulty in getting a home and the challenges that are there. And for those who are go-getters, you'll find a way. And maybe the idea of a 4-bedroom brick and tile home with a double garage and a couple of cars parked on the driveway, that might not necessarily be the ideal if you're trying to get a start. But anyway, Lyle, Shelton, what are your thoughts here as you hear Jenny reflecting on those things?
I really sympathise with Jenny, and I agree. This is one of the key concerns that Family First has, is the lack of home affordability. I think, Neil, I'm in my mid-50s. I'm probably the last generation that was able to, expect that if you had a good job and worked hard, you could expect to go to the bank and get a mortgage and own your own home. I look at my children's generation today, and even those with good jobs are just despair because it's very, very difficult to get into the property market. Some will find a way, some will get parental help, some are extraordinary, but the average person, it's extremely difficult. Whereas in my generation and the one before it, if you had a normal job, not even a high-paying job, you could reasonably expect to participate in the Australian dream of home ownership. That's gone now, and I'm deeply disturbed by that. We have to recalibrate our economy so that land is affordable and so that young people can afford to buy a home, to get married and to found a family, because many young people are delaying marriage and family formation because of economics. And that's not the Australian dream. It's not the Australia that the Anzacs and the war veterans that Jenny mentioned fought for.
Jenny in Portland, thank you so much for, a from-the-heart comment there. Really appreciate hearing from you. 1800 316 316 to join our conversation. Let's take another call. Megan is in Cookanup in WA. Hi, Megan.
Hi, thank you for taking the call. I'm humbled to be talking to both you and Lyle. You're both pretty legendary. I just wanted to say, so we're in WA and we vote next weekend, and it is a very scary time. The Labour Party locally have threatened to close down all private rehabs, which breaks my heart because we partner with Shalom quite vigorously. But more importantly, I just wanted to ask, wouldn't there be a smart thing to consolidate all of the Family Voice, Christian parties, the ACL, because then there'd be a united one group that could give us something to look for? Because, if there's 50 candidates in Queensland, hopefully, for the federal, we may not have any in WA or in our area. And wouldn't it be a good idea for just for a bigger group of similar-minded people?
Megan, I think you're asking the right question at the right moment, because some of us will remember the Australian Conservatives under Cory Bernardi, and our guest Lyle Shelton was also a part of that. And I think you have some regrets around things as the way they developed there. But Lyle, you might even like to give us a little history lesson as to how we ought to understand the fact that there was a group of Christian parties that all got together and said, why don't we do this as one and we'll be more powerful? And then all of a sudden, with the signing of a document, it was gone.
Yeah, that's right. Look, Megan, your question is absolutely the right one, as Neil said. We did try this back in 2018, 2019. Family First, which had been going for about probably 15 years, they folded their tent and merged with Cory Bernardi's Australian Conservatives. I thought that was the right decision at the time. It was an attempt to unite disparate conservative voices, but Australian Conservatives performed very poorly at the 2019 election, got 1% nationwide. And then Cory Bernardi decided that he would shut the party down and wouldn't continue with it. I thought that was a shame. I think with time, you've got to be persistent in this space. So there's a lot of spilt milk, Megan, and I guess I'm here because a group of us 3 years ago decided we would resurrect Family First, because we just think there's an important need for this sort of expression and opportunity for people to vote for these values. Over in Western Australia, you've got the Australian Christians Party. They're only active in the West, and they'll be contesting the upcoming WA state election. And I'd encourage Megan, yourself, I'm sure you're already aware of Marika Gronwald, who does a terrific job there. I think she'll get elected to the WA upper house. Family First is not active in Western Australia. We'd like to be one day, and if we do, we'll obviously be working very closely and in collaboration with Australian Christians. But we just have to do our best to keep in the space and to cooperate with other like-minded people. I'll just pick up on one other point you made, Megan. Australian Christian Lobby and Family Voice Australia are not political parties. They are advocacy groups. They're really important. Their role is different to a party. They will never field candidates in an election, so we can't merge with them because they're not political parties. But they perform an important role, and their work creates awareness of the issues that parties like us carry, and therefore hopefully help encourage people to vote for candidates who have the same values.
Megan, anything further to add? Does that clarify that sort of, doubt in your mind as to how things were developing and maybe what ought to develop?
Yeah, I think so. Thank you. I realised when I'd said Family Voice that they're not a political party, but you can tell from my accent I'm not born and bred here, and I'm very grateful to live here.
Yep.
And so I will be looking at the ACP, and I just wish you all the best for what you're endeavouring on, Lyle. We've got to stand up.
Thank you, Megan.
Yeah, God bless this incredible land.
Megan,
yes, amen.
Thank you so much for your call. Our talkback line is open on 1800 316 316, just to pick up on something aligned with what Megan was sharing, because sometimes people will think, well, just vote for a Christian candidate and that'll be the problem solved. It does appear to be the case, and I'll get your thoughts here, Lyle Shelton. Just voting for a Christian candidate is completely meaningless, because we've seen Christian candidates elected to parliaments, or people who claim to be Christian, and they just haven't had much of an idea about Christian ethics at all and how that might apply to a political context. And then you might have the situation in Queensland recently, where you've had a whole bunch of Christians elected to the Queensland Parliament. And the first thing that's done as soon as that that new government in Queensland takes power is that there's a gag on the issues around life. So no one's allowed to even talk about abortion for 4 years. And yet this would be one of the primary things that Christians might want to bring to the reform agenda. Any thoughts here around the sorts of persons you might vote for and whether that's going to make any difference, whether they're Christian or not, or whether they're going to be standing up and for the issues that really matter?
Yeah, really important point, Neil. I think, look, obviously I'm supportive of Christians in politics regardless of the party. Obviously I'm here promoting Family First. I'm passionate about that. But for me, the cause is the cause, and we need good Christians in the Liberal Party and the Labor Party. I believe that, and I'm sincere about that. But I've seen too many people go to the electorate saying, hey, I'm a Christian, and I'll turn up at Christian meetings, pro-life rallies, say all the right thing to get our vote, and then do the opposite in Parliament. There were Christians who went to Christian meetings in the 2022 Victorian election campaign, got elected, and then at least one of those that I know voted to expel Moira Deeming from the Liberal Party room. Now, this is a guy who I stood next to in meetings wooing the Christian vote. In the Queensland election last year, you had people who had previously been pro-life and Christians going to the election on a pro-life platform, and then standing next to David Crucifeli saying they would support abortion during the election campaign, and then voting for his gag motion when he got into Parliament. So it's so important that Christians are discerning. Don't just believe a Liberal Party person because they say they're a Christian voter or a Christian or turn up at your pro-life event or turn up at your church. Make sure they do what they say, because too many of them haven't done that, and that's a real grief to me. And that's another reason why I'm just so passionate about what we're doing at Family First, because we've got to put people into the Parliament who won't compromise or drink the Kool-Aid once they get in.
Just quickly here, and I guess this is more a personal aside too, but given your history here, Lyle Shelton, the thought that it doesn't matter who's in power, Christian or non-Christian, the ability to hold those policy agendas to account once they're in power. This is a power issue, isn't it? Because if you've got some assurances before they're elected, then you've got something to hold them accountable to. What are your thoughts here around, the fact that there are advocacy groups like the one you used to lead, the Australian Christian Lobby and Family Voice Australia, wonderful organisations, but individuals holding their MPs personally to account in their own electorate?
Look, it's really important, Neil, and look, we live in a participatory democracy, but life's been so good in Australia, many of us have stopped participating, and we've just let our politicians run our country on autopilot, including the ones who go in under a Christian banner. And it's so important that we just pay a little bit of attention, we keep an eye open to what's going on, what they're saying, and then what they're doing, and that we make our voices heard. And, you mentioned Australian Christian Lobby under Michelle Pearce's leadership doing a terrific job. They are very much a watchdog over the politicians, and they often have terrific online campaign facilities and ways where you can send direct emails and make your voices heard when the politicians don't do what they say they will do. So there's different ways, there's different organisations to help engage. And then locally, in your local area, make sure you know who your local Member of Parliament is. And if they are a Christian, make sure, stay close to them, encourage them, and encourage them not to compromise. I think that's really important, and some of that can be done by personal relationship, some of that can be done through the tools that advocacy groups like ACL and Family Voice give.
Well, you keep battling away, Lyle Shelton, and as one of our callers said, you're a legend, and I know that there's a lot of listeners who will know that the Lyle Shelton, who leads Family First Party in Australia, has a legendary background, and it's gone over decades now. And I know that there'll be a lot of people on the sidelines cheering as you're out there too and looking to be a Senate candidate for New South Wales. Just let me, as we just draw loose ends together here, Family First, standing more than 100 candidates nationally. 50 of those will be in the state of Queensland alone. 5 candidates for Senate seats. You're in New South Wales as the Senate candidate. What other ones, just for listeners, in their state or their territory. What other Senate candidates have you got standing? Because I guess when you're wanting to get into an upper house position, you get to examine all those pieces of legislation. Who else is standing on your Senate team?
Neil, I'm really proud of the Senate team that we've got. They're all high-quality people who would really add to the parliament. Katie Lush in Queensland, she lives at Dalby. She's been involved in Christian education. She has a law degree, very articulate. She's been travelling all over southern and central Queensland lately. In Victoria, we've got Bernie Finn. He spent 25 years as a member of the state parliament with the Liberal Party. They kicked him out because he was pro-life and pro-family. So he's joined us. He has a lot of experience, high-quality man, parliamentary experience. In South Australia, we've got Christopher Brohere, who used to work with the Australian Christian Lobby. He's a barrister, again, a policy expert. And then in the ACT, we've got Elizabeth Kickett, who, again, is another person the Liberal Party expelled because of her pro-family views, and now she's with us. So we've got a terrific team. It's going to be hard for us to get elected. It's a big mountain for us to climb, but we're all committed to giving it a red-hot go.
All right. Well, for listeners to connect with Lyle Shelton and the Family First Party, I'm sure there's all sorts of ways that people that you'd be calling on for support with an election campaign coming. No doubt there's a war chest that you're trying to get together. And, no doubt some people might be saying, well, Neil, do you sound like you're endorsing the Family First Party? Well, certainly Lyle Shelton has been a friend for a long time, and I think he's got runs on the board standing for the sorts of things that align with our Christian values. And so that's where we might be quite confident in saying, Lyle Shelton, run with all your might and let's see some good success. Lyle leads Family First Party in Australia, familyfirstparty.org.au. And he did mention too that there is a Family First conference that's happening in Brisbane just on a week, or just over a week away now, just before the Church and State Conference. And for listeners, register for that Church and State Conference. They've got a bigger venue this year, but it looks like it could be really selling so well. To get your seat, register for that Church and State Conference. And no doubt Lyle would like to meet you too if you're interested in politics and would like to be a part of the Family First Conference that's on just ahead of it. familyfirstparty.org.au. Lyle, thanks so much for sharing your thoughts with us today on 2020.
Neil, thank you. It's been a privilege. Thank you for your kind words. I just want to give all glory to God, and thank you for the opportunity to speak.
Thanks for taking time to listen to this audio on demand from Vision Christian Media. To find out more about us, go to vision.org.au.